Busting busted myths, Windows 7 isn't any better than Windows XP. Another channel recently talked about how Windows 7 and Windows Vista was actually worse than Windows XP. Now, operating system preference is definitely a preference rather than necessarily a hard choice. But generally, Windows 7 will run on any hardware that would run on Windows XP, and will do so more securely and faster than it did on Windows XP. There are a couple of exceptions that are specific to how people have chosen to implement drivers and some tuning settings that you can set based on the type of hardware that you're running and the way you're planning to run your hardware. Windows Vista killed off GDI acceleration, which was a way that applications drew the windows that they were using. And that was because with the new arrow interface, a lot of the GDI stuff just plain wasn't being used. However, you can change your hardware acceleration settings using DXDiag in order to force Windows to use the old settings and enable GDI acceleration. If you're running Windows on old hardware that was really meant for Windows XP, this is often a good thing to do. And if you do it, Windows 7 and Windows Vista will both be faster and more stable than Windows XP ever was. There are, of course, some pieces of hardware that are not supported by Windows Vista that were supported by Windows XP just because of the drivers that they run. These pieces of hardware are pretty rare, and chances are, if you're still running them, it's time for an upgrade because they would have probably been a product that was released over 10 years ago. And most technology just isn't designed to do that. But in almost every other quantifiable way, Windows 7 is superior to Windows XP. People will quote to me, "Oh, it uses more RAM." No, actually it doesn't. A well-tuned Windows 7 operating system will use less RAM than Windows XP. Oh, it runs my software slower. No, if you set the DXDiag settings correctly for your graphics card, it will in fact outperform Windows XP every single time. Oh, it doesn't run a particular piece of software. I haven't run across too many of these. Most of the pieces of software that don't run are something that required a hardware dongle, and the driver just isn't supported. For the most part, anything that ran on Windows XP that wasn't actually a Windows 3.1 piece of software and therefore so old that it doesn't run at all, like Duke Nukem 3D or some DOS-based application that just happened to be able to be launched from Windows XP, will in fact run on Windows 7. So, at least in this case, Windows 7 and Windows Vista is pretty much superior to Windows XP in every way if you know how to set it up. If you don't know how to set it up, you probably shouldn't have upgraded from Windows XP to Windows Vista because your hardware wasn't ready and it's a user error, not an operating system error in the way that you have configured the operating system as opposed to the way it ought to be configured. Don't just assume that you're going to take something that is the latest and greatest, install it on old junky hardware, and have it work correctly out of the box.